This is Chanel Code. This is what we are going to go through, this menstrual cycle. Menstrual cycle, which is the most important thing that we need to understand before knowing a pregnancy. We need to understand to say after menstrual cycle or after ovulation, that's where we're going to have fertilization, if at all there is intercourse, fertilization of the egg that has been released. So if at all nothing like that, the egg has not been fertilized or the ovum has not been fertilized, then menstruation will occur. So now, what are the things that are we supposed to talk about? So we start with the definition of terms. These terms are very much important to us. So the first term that we are going to talk about is the ovarian cycle. So ovarian cycle, this one just describes the changes that occurs in the follicles of the ovaries. You need to understand to say, when you're talking about the menstrual cycle, not only are you supposed to talk about the phases of menstrual cycle, but you also have to talk about the ovarian changes that takes place during the menstrual cycle, because that's where it begins. That's where the hormones that are responsible for proliferation of the endometrium comes from the ovaries that we have. And then the other cycle that we have is the uterine cycle, of which we have now the actions of the endometrium shedding, becoming proliferated, becoming secretory, and all that. So all these the ovarian cycle and the uterine cycle, it is important to understand that they happen simultaneously, they happen in coherence. So now, the menstrual cycle, you need to understand it has a minimum or the average of 28 days that occurs in a woman's body, where specific changes occurs at different stages. So you need to understand to say the cycle itself is controlled by the hormones. So that's the first thing that you need to talk about. The menstrual cycle is controlled by the endocrine system, hormones. So which hormones are we talking about? So first, before talking about hormones, let's talk about the glands that are involved. So if you talk about the hypothalamus, so the hypothalamus is the one that is responsible for the release of gonadotrophin releasing hormone. This gonadotrophin releasing hormone, it is the one that is responsible for releasing or stimulating the pituitary gland to release the gonadotrophin hormones. And which ones are we calling as gonadotrophin hormones? It is the follicle stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone. So the first thing you need to understand, we have the hypothalamus. From the hypothalamus will release gonadotrophin releasing hormone that works on the pituitary gland, that causes the production of two hormones or gonadotrophin hormones known as the follicle stimulating hormone on the right side, and then on the left side, if you can see, we have got luteinizing hormone. So these two hormones that are released from the pituitary gland, what are their many functions? So the function is, for follicle stimulating hormone, like the name says, follicle stimulating hormone, it is the hormone responsible for stimulating the follicles to start maturation. So it triggers the ovaries so that those follicles can start being they start developing. So that is what follicle stimulating hormone does. So it just leads to the development of follicles. Then what is the work of luteinizing hormone? So luteinizing hormone, what it does is it works on the ovaries. So which means after follicle stimulating hormone has worked on the ovaries as well, which is to make them to develop, luteinizing hormone is going to be there in terms of helping in ovulation, which is the release of an ovum at the 14th day. So you need to understand to say, once the ovary or the ovum has been released, there is a shell that remains from where the ovum has ruptured from. So there is a shell that remains, and the shell is known as the corpus luteum. So this corpus luteum, what does it do? What it does, it produces the hormone known as what? Progesterone hormone. This progesterone hormone has a function of making sure that if at all pregnancy happens or fertilization tends to happen, it maintains the pregnancy, causing relaxation of all the muscles in the body, hence giving chance for that fetus to develop. Not until the placenta is fully developed, that's when it can degenerate into the corpus albicans. Then estrogen, what produces estrogen? So estrogen is being produced by the ovaries as well. So follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, this is what they do. So estrogen, what does estrogen do? We've talked about the work of progesterone. So what does estrogen do? So estrogen causes the uterus wall to repair, or it is a hormone known as what? A growth hormone that causes proliferation of the endometrium, making it to become thickened, very rich in blood vessels. So you need to understand this before you go to the menstrual phase there. So you need to understand to say ovulation, as ovulation is taking place, as the ovarian cycle is taking place, also there are changes that are occurring in the uterus because of these two hormones that are being produced. Follicle stimulating hormone stimulating the development of follicles, and hence you are going to find to say luteinizing hormone will come in after they mature, then causing ovulation to occur. Then the ovum will be released into the fallopian tube. Then fertilization will occur. If fertilization doesn't occur, the corpus luteum that remains to produce progesterone hormone will degenerate and turn into a corpus albicans. So now let's talk about the phases of menstrual cycle. That was about the ovarian cycle. So we need to understand to say that the menstrual cycles has got an average days of 28 days. That is the average for a woman. So the cycle, you need to understand to say the cycle is divided into three main phases which are important, and the first one is known as the menstrual phase. Menstrual coming from the word bleeding. So if fertilization hasn't occurred, remember ovulation has taken place, but fertilization hasn't taken place. So if it doesn't, the ovum together with the endometrium, which become thickened due to the effects of progesterone and also the major effects of estrogen, you're going to find that it will do what? It will shed off. So let's listen to what this slide is saying. So this is the first phase. It takes about 1 to 5 days, though it can vary in some individuals due to hormonal imbalances. So if the egg is not fertilized, the corpus luteum degenerates into a corpus albicans, which is a fibrous scar tissue. Like I mentioned, if fertilization hasn't taken place, the corpus luteum, which is there to produce progesterone hormone, if fertilization doesn't occur, it will degenerate, then a corpus albicans will be formed, which is a scar. The functional layer of the endometrium, which is dependent in high levels of these ovarian hormone, will shed off in menstruation. So what is producing these hormones is the ovary. So we've got progesterone and estrogen. So if now that there is generation of the corpus luteum, which means there will be no production of progesterone hormone, so hence there will be shedding of the endometrium, and hence the blood that is seen. So now what are the components of blood that is seen? So the menstrual flow consists of the endometrial cells. So cells from the endometrium, secretions from the endometrial glands, blood from the broken down capillaries, and the unfertilized ovum. That's what is visibly seen during menstruation. So blood loss of 10 to 35 ml is considered normal. But what you're going to find to say the blood is or the woman is having heavy menses, that is going to be a condition, and that's what we'll talk about next in the menstrual irregularities or disorders of menstruation. So when women experiences abdominal pain or abdominal cramps, this is due to contraction of the uterus and the abdominal muscles to expel the menstrual fluid. So most women experiences cramps during menstruation, and the reason for that is due to the contractions of trying to remove the contents of the uterine, since fertilization hasn't taken place. So that is the menstrual phase. After menstrual phase, what occurs? So we said menstrual phase from the first day to the fifth day. Then what follows is the proliferative phase, which is also known as the follicular phase, if we relate it to the ovarian cycle in the ovaries. So follicle stimulating hormone stimulates the ovaries to start maturing and start to producing estrogen. Estrogen will stimulate the proliferation of the functional layer in the endometrium and is thickened in the preparation for reception of a fertilized ovum. So estrogen will now start or resume its work of making the endometrium to be thickened, making the endometrium to become ready for reception of fertilized ovum. That is proliferation or regeneration in other terms. So accompanied by an increase in the numbers of mucus secreting glands and blood capillaries. So you find to say due to the effects of estrogen, the numbers of capillaries or blood vessels are going to increase, and that's what we are going to call the uterine function layer becomes highly vesicular, to make sure that the uterine endometrium is supplied with a lot of blood vessels, and that's the thickening that is the one that we talk about. So this phase will end when ovulation occurs at 14 days before the beginning of the next period and estrogen production declines. So immediately ovulation has taken place, where there will be the release of the ovum out from the ovaries, then into the fallopian tube, then proliferative phase, we will say it has finished. So now towards ovulation, what things are you going to observe? What is going to be there? So towards ovulation, the cervical mucus will increase and become slippery. So cervical mucus in the cervix will increase and become very slippery. And also this is why you are going to find that women may experience mood changes or mood swings, mood sana, breast tenderness, and also abdominal pain, and also increased sex drive. This is what is mostly experienced by most women as they are approaching towards ovulation. So from the last day, we say from the first to the fifth day, it is the menstrual phase that is occurring. From the fifth day to the 14th day, we are calling it as the ovulation, where the ovum now has to be released. So that is about proliferative phase. So proliferative phase, we are just trying to take it back. The endometrium, which had to shed off, we bring it back to the way it was. It becomes thick, becomes ready for reception of the fertilized ovum. Then ovulation phase, I'm sure you've ever heard of where they ask about the four phases of the menstrual cycle, and mostly we just know the menstrual phase, the proliferative phase, and circulatory phase. So here we also have ovulatory phase, of which it has been included to be the fourth one. So ovulatory phase, what are we talking about when we say ovulatory phase? We are talking about ovulation. So the mature egg is released from the ovarian follicle into the oviduct, which is the other name for the fallopian tube. The release of luteinizing hormone matures the egg and weakens the wall of the follicles in the ovary, causing the fully developed follicles to release its secondary oocytes. So under ovulatory phase, we're just talking about after the maturation due to the influence of luteinizing hormone that is going to cause the release of this ovum into the fallopian tube. That's ovulatory phase that we are talking about. So these oocytes promptly matures into an oocyte and then becomes a mature ovum, and then after that it is going to be released. And during this phase, that's why we find that some women may experience pain. So the term that is referred to pain during menstruation is known as metuschimes. Metuschimes, some may pronounce it differently, depends on how you pronounce it. Then the other phase that we have is known as the secretory phase, which is also known as the luteal phase, where we are talking about where the luteinizing hormone will come in and do its function. So after the lining cells of the ovarian follicle develops into the corpus luteum, stimulated by luteinizing hormone, the corpus luteum produces now progesterone and some estrogen. Since the corpus luteum has remained there, its function is to make sure that it produces the progesterone and some little amount of estrogen. These hormones are making sure that the endometrium is kept in its shape of being thickened, being ready for for reception of the fertilized ovum. So under the influence of progesterone, the endometrium becomes edematous and secretory glands production increases amount of water and mucus. So under secretory phase, the only thing you're supposed to talk about is the production of progesterone and estrogen, and also the effects of these hormones when they are produced. Now, what are we going to have? So this is the secretory phase. You need to understand it is the fixed, regardless of the duration of the cycle. Increase in progesterone production by the corpus luteum. If no fertilization occurs, the corpus luteum now degenerates. So if no fertilization has occurred, the corpus luteum, which is producing estrogen and progesterone, that is supporting the endometrium, then you find it will degenerate into a corpus albicum, which means estrogen and progesterone levels are going to fall down, and hence the menstrual cycle will start now. So that's why they say menstruation will occur if the ovum is not fertilized and a new cycle will begin. So that is what we were talking about if you look at this. So now, what you need to understand again, the question can be asked in different ways, where they are just going to ask you about the 3 phases of menstrual cycle. You are just supposed to talk about menstruation or menstrual phase, proliferative phase, and the secretory phase. If at all there is an involvement of the 4th phase, we need to come up with the ovulatory phase, like the exam that was brought in 2024. Yes, 2024 May intake. So they asked them about 4 phases of menstrual cycle, of which the commonly known number is 3. So that's what you are supposed to talk about. So that is the menstrual cycle.